Hello, all you lovely coaches out there. This month, I'm doing a video blog for our Competency Corner. And this month, it's called The Three Agreements. Basically, the three kinds of agreements that it takes to set up a coaching relationship. First, the global agreement. Next, the overall objective of the coaching. And third, the session agreements. These haven't been clearly outlined by the ICF until the last, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years. And so many of you that have been coaching for a long time had to learn that we needed to have a session agreement, for example. However, the global agreement has always been around. It's in the ICF core competencies, competency number 2, creating the coaching agreement. And the details around it have evolved over the years. So the first thing I'd like to do is to frame out just really quickly what we mean by a global agreement. And that means the overall framing of relationship. The payment details, the confidentiality parameters, rescheduling rules, who calls who, termination details, the length of a session, or perhaps even the engagement itself. And any other kind of details that you think you want to really include, renewal parameters, for example, that's generally a global agreement. Now, there's different iterations of global agreements. For example, if you have a sponsor relationship, an organization hires you, and you have a coach that I'm a client, that you are going to be in relationship with directly versus the sponsor. So a global agreement in this case would be with a sponsor on all of the parameters, and it may well include also some of the individual. It may involve something about the individual in the agreement, that you agree to do executive coaching or business development coaching or leadership development coaching for this individual or this many individuals in the organization. So that's just something to consider. Some of the parameters might be a little more complex, particularly around confidentiality when you have a sponsoring relationship. So just be aware that you need to be very specific in around confidentiality parameters when you're working with a sponsor. Who reports? The reporting schedule, for example, you might want to actually include in that global agreement. So that's just a general little bit on a global agreement. Basic stuff, written, preferably. Doesn't say anything about a requirement necessarily for a written agreement, but for best practices for business, a written agreement is going to cover your bases much better. Especially if there's any repercussions in maybe a corporate complex matrix that you might be working within. Or if you're working with an individual, the global agreement is one of the things that begins to educate your client about how to work with a coach and what they can do with it even. I actually have my global agreement along with a letter of introduction in my intake packet that says a little more about how best to use your coach. That would be an add-on perhaps that you might be interested in around a global agreement. So then once you have the global agreement in place, the next thing would be the overall objective of the reason that individual wants to work with you. So maybe they want to write a book and they're hiring you to support them in brainstorming and accountability. Maybe they're working on internal to an organization a leadership development plan for themselves. Or maybe they're transitioning into retirement and they're redesigning the next level, the inspired level of their next iteration in this world. Whatever it is, that's an agreement that you make sure that you're really clear on. What is the individual globally, I don't want to use that word global again. What is the individual goal or objective for that client? Why did they hire you? It's a little different than the global agreement because it really is, hey, it could be more than one thing. It could be, I want to write a book, but I also want to work on moving. I don't like where I live. I'm trying to figure that out. I'm not sure with my work situation. It could be a little more complex. So you find what the container of that is for someone. And quite often my clients come to me with 2 or 3 things when they start up. And so it's what's the presenting goal or goals. It's the individual desires and objectives of that person. Might even be more inclusive than they thought in the very beginning. It could be, oh, I didn't know I could work on that. Oh, that's great. Right? I hear that a lot. So you find out about these things when you actually give them their individual intake packet. And that, for me, I have 20 questions. Personal questions, business questions, and then where do you want to start questions? All different kinds of questions. What's important to you? What's your greatest learning? What are 3 to 5 things you need to tell your coach that you wouldn't necessarily tell anybody else? Very interesting answers to that one, by the way. So you can customize it to be whatever you want for your different contexts that you're working in. However, that's where you find out the heart of things, what that person really wants. And it's often quite broader than what they actually hire you for in the coaching. So it gives you a nice platform to begin to work. And the last question I ask is, where do you want to start? So that's the second level agreement, right? You have your global agreement, contracting the relationship. You've got your objective and goals agreement. What do I want to work on in the parameters of coaching? And then the last thing is something that's the newest thing on the team of the 3 agreements, and that is the session-focused agreement, the session agreement. You'll find these and the structure of the expectations of a coaching conversation in the PCC markers that the ICF has come up with, or that the volunteer teams, of which I'm a part of that too, have come up with over in the last 5 or 6 years. It helps to give you an idea of the expected elements in each coaching session in some way or another. Just in general, defining what they want to use their time for, what they'd like to leave the session with as a result of that time together, and what's important to them about it. That can actually feed action quite often. So go and look at your PCC markers. If you haven't, then that will be included where I've posted this video. And think about, what are the things in a session agreement that are important for you to make sure that you touch upon? It may be broader or more narrow than what they said they wanted to actually use the relationship for. You have to meet the client where they are. Sometimes they'll come to you with something completely different. Maybe their dog died and they're just really upset, and you manage that and help them talk through it. And that might be even the first 10 or 15 minutes of a conversation to clear the way for them to speak about something else, and maybe one of the goals they started with. So depends on where the client is, what they bring, and then you need to actually dance with them based on what they bring, structuring the conversation so that they could get the best value out of it. So those are the 3 agreements. If you have any questions, you can certainly send to me at pamela.richard@coachu-hq.com or just look me up on the Coach U website. All right. Hope all is well for you and that you got what you needed, perhaps some insight into the 3 agreements. Thanks a lot. Bye for now.